Super. Thanks everyone for being here. Really, really happy to join the stage with such great people. I think given we have 30 minutes, let's just jump straight into it. We've been hearing a lot of conversations around how AI is actually taking over society these days, and humans are soon going to become redundant completely, and our brains will stop working. Have you seen examples of this happening, and what are your thoughts on this?
I'm going to give the kind of slightly controversial answer from unfettered capitalism, which is absolutely, like, this will destroy jobs, this will degrade jobs. This is not an answer that is necessarily going to kind of be super popular in this room, but I think as a society outside of this room, where we're very focused on innovation, driving the next generation of technologies, people do need to consider the impact that this will have. I mean, we had a conversation backstage around some of the creative arts, things like voice work. We've seen a really prominent example recently of someone having their voice, which they have licensable ownership of, essentially stolen. And I think we will have to consider, firstly, are there protected categories of work? Creative work, maybe as an example, your daughter's finger paintings, perhaps, that we're not comfortable with, DALI representations of. And secondly, are there ways that we can think about reskilling key industries where people do have kind of employment risk? I mean, we're seeing, certainly in some of the work that I'm doing, we're seeing quite a lot of development in co-coding. It's no longer the case that software development will be taught the way that it was 10 years ago. It'll be taught quite dramatically different in 5 years' time. So how do we take that previous generation of, for example, software engineers or other knowledge workers, and as a society give them the tools to reskill to remain in the workforce?
Super good answer. I think that is very extreme. The example you were talking about was Scarlett Johansson, right?
That was Scarlett Johansson,
with
yeah.
her voice being taken and the models being used on that. It is very scary because you're losing control over something that did belong to you once.
100%.
Over to you. What is your thought on this? Where do you lie on the spectrum?
Of course, I think parts of the work that we know today will disappear, 100% sure. But if we think what has happened before all these tech innovations before, new kinds of work will appear. And if I think what's the impact of the AI is that the cost of cognitive work or cognitive load will go down. I think the automation will spread into long tail of use cases that were not affordable before. If I think kind of recent discussion we had with a couple of investors on, okay, what's the addressable market of specific company? And it's hard to predict any addressable market, because if you only think like it will replace number of people, but actually those people will get new capabilities to do something else that they do today. Probably more value adding, probably more kind of very creative. So in a way, I think it's gonna challenge us as a humans how we work. And if we think like SaaS or enterprises where the SaaS software goes in, probably we go into very different landscape there that we didn't know before. And I think it's going to be massive potential, but it will challenge exactly the fundamentals, what we think as a work today. And I'm quite excited that it will accelerate a lot of things. It will, people who are kind of open for that change, they will thrive. And of course, you have a big bunch of people who think that I don't want to take it because it's going to take my job or it's going to be negative. Those people will struggle. And that's going to just divide companies, teams, whatnot into different A and B classes, and that's going to be the challenge.
So a slightly more optimistic
in a way.
viewpoint in some ways.
Sorry, Felix.
No.
I'm an optimist as well. I think I'm an optimist that recognizes the answer to this is probably not going to come from people like me who are funding the very innovative technologies at the head of this. It has to come more broadly from society, because exactly as you say, I mean, there are examples in history where farm labor was mechanized or weaving was mechanized, where the reaction of weavers to that when they didn't have jobs anymore was to destroy machinery.
Yes.
And it's very divisive within society. And so, really, if we're going to reduce social inequality and maintain some kind of cohesiveness, there needs to be a kind of broader solution, whether it's from governments or something at that level. Sorry, optimism.
Great, and then Felix, where do you lie on this?
Yeah, I think echoing some of the points that you guys both made. Obviously there are going to be a lot of jobs that get wiped out, and as with kind of like any technologically infused process, new jobs get created. I read a thing the other day saying that I think it's 65% of the jobs today didn't exist in the 1940s. And even within our industry, if we think about the companies that we back or that we work with, most of the jobs there just didn't exist, right? You take UX designer and product manager and social media manager, and even now, like a good example of AI creating a job is something like a prompt engineer, which literally 3 years ago didn't exist, and those are super high-paying jobs. So I'm sure that's going to keep happening in ways that we can't exactly foresee how it's going to work. And then to Bob's point, I think clearly the main challenge is just going to be how we keep upskilling and reskilling ourselves, because the pace at which the stuff is going to change is just going to be I think stuff that we've never seen before. And in order to upskill and reskill yourself, I think there's a lot of psychological barriers to that and financial barriers, and that's something that I don't know if we're 100% ready for. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because right now we have 3 investors on stage, and so we are definitely coming from one perspective, which is that technology can be used normally for good, and how do we make sure we capitalize on that as well. I think the next question I wanted to ask is, when I talk more to founders, it's a very big moral dilemma about how to make sure that you don't dumb down humans by making it too easy for us. You also want to keep creativity relevant, you want us to flourish, you want humans to still use our brains. So in your opinion, can you also add some words around how AI can augment our experience in Earth? Anyone who wants to take the first stab?
Yeah, there are still significant problems in the world that require solving that AI can't solve and probably won't be able to solve. Novel problems. AI is excellent at looking at a corpus of information and synthesizing it quickly, reproducing data, reproducing information in a way that's readily consumable. But for example, the Riemann hypothesis is an unsolved problem of mathematics. I keep asking ChatGPT 4.0 to solve it for me, and it keeps not solving it because no human has solved it. No human may solve it within our lifetime. Mathematicians are probably accelerated in their learning. If I'm an undergraduate calculus student now, I have the tools at my disposal to learn far more quickly than previous cohorts of my peers. So I think that the trick, societally, and reflecting on your comment about founders, how to think about kind of engineering products for a brighter future, a more optimistic future, is to give people the tools to accelerate and solve pressing problems that aren't solved. Ultimately, if we're providing tools for them to do what they already do more quickly, those things will probably be somewhat commodified over time.
Good answer. There are still problems that we haven't been able to solve yet.
Yeah. My perspective probably a little bit different. If I come from a quite large corporation, and I've been seeing the same thing happening over and over again in large companies, that sort of you lose the innovation, let's say the lens into your business, because you sort of optimize certain parts. And what happened with Gen AI and so forth, if you bring that to the table, play a role, it unleashes creativity, it gives new perspectives to the topics that you thought that you knew. And if I think that context and think that what's the next generation most likely for smart agents, they are more like able to do actions, they are able to do sequence of actions, they are, like this LLM phase is just the one part, and then you enter this action part where they can write code or they can do stuff. And if you multiply that with 10,000, probably you can have a lot of different things to be solved in a companies, in a science and so forth, because they can run experiments that you sort of moderate. but you sort of have amazing capability in a place. So I'm thinking that's going to help us to solve large problems, at least in theory. And that unleashes new types of thinking as well, because sort of we are quite limited as human beings to connect multiple dots together, and it can really kind of help us on that. I'm mainly worried that it can as well open Pandora's box by doing itself so much.
You mentioned the next generation, and I know you have a daughter as well. Is she using AI in her daily life, and how do you feel about this?
I think my daughter will be wondering why on earth you didn't do this. Why did you be so simple and complex before? Because it's sort of, you can see it every time that how new generation kind of adopts technology so swiftly, and we are kind of struggling with our past and behaviors and routines and so forth, and basically you have a clean slate to start something new. It's totally different.
Great. And then Felix, how do you think AI can augment our human experience for good?
Yeah, I mean, I think within like an enterprise setting or in the startups that we're seeing, definitely the main use cases I'd say are like at the moment it's AI really helping humans out. It's not necessarily a case of just like coming in and replacing them, even though I know we've already spoken about that. But yeah, it's more of this notion of having like a team of 24/7 interns that are helping you just be more productive. And I think the results of some of that stuff are maybe a bit counterintuitive. So to give an example, like Jussi, you just mentioned, like selling work and not these like agentic-based systems. So there's a whole wave of companies now doing, like outbound, like an AI outbound sales rep tool, where you literally you contract it and it just gives you good leads. Like that's basically the tool. And so if you think of a team that uses a tool like that, on one hand, yes, they become a lot more productive. So maybe they have like 50% more leads. And that's like a direct productivity gain that comes from the AI. I think a lot of companies are taking that productivity gain and then basically reinvesting it into the same kind of part of the org. So if you think of a sales team, yes, your outbound leads might increase, but then you kind of have to counterbalance that with investing more in the inbound sales team that's actually going to action those leads and convert them into customers. So I think that's happening a lot. You're seeing it in software development as well, where, through, maybe it's a GitHub Copilot type product where engineers are becoming more productive. I think actually counterintuitively, often companies are reinvesting into that so that they can ship even quicker and grow even quicker. So I think that's more within like an enterprise setting, like this notion of, AI augmenting humans. And then I'm obviously not like I'm not like an anthropologist or anything, so I'm probably not very qualified to give my view on, AI and society and so on. But yeah, even when you're thinking about your kids, it's like, if you can imagine AI tutors that are going to be infinitely patient with, your daughter or your son learning something and understanding exactly what their issue is and then tailoring the experience for them. That's, those types of use cases, and you can think of a million of them, it's really exciting, right? I'm sure that there are a lot of downsides, right? Like when people start having AI boyfriends and girlfriends, and I can see a world in which that goes very, very pear-shaped.
Yeah, super good points. You mentioned quite an interesting thing that we had also talked about previously with the enterprise readiness of adopting AI. One of the theses that I have is that I don't think enterprises are quite ready yet, but they know it is the next big wave that they do need to understand. And as a result of that, I've seen a lot of AI startups be able to close sales quite quickly, because I think enterprises right now are testing out a lot of tools and seeing what works. Like you say, it's amazing if you can go to sleep and then wake up and there's an AI coworker that has been able to close tickets for you, and then you can just over 5 minutes train the AI to do even better continuously. Yes. So it's a very, very easy sell. But I mean, how do you think it's going to develop over the long run? Because I think enterprises are also quite normally slow to pick up on technology traditionally.
So from our perspective, I think we see that people in enterprises are ready on an individual basis to start adopting these tools quite quickly. As you were mentioning your last comment, in terms of education, in terms of your daughter's future, I was reflecting on the fact that we have had an intern for the first time with us this year. And one of the kind of natural progressions in venture capital is you learn a bunch of venture jargon as you go. And during a meeting, someone mentioned a liquidation preference, I think it was, and he had ChatGPT out and just said, what's a liquidation preference? And immediately had the answer. That interaction 10 years ago would have been after the meeting, hey, can I have a quick conversation with you? Can you explain this to me? Do you have time? 30 to 40 minutes of time was squeezed into a 5-second interaction and massively accelerated his learning. And I think similar things are already happening in enterprises. People are developing software using Copilot. It's already in use, and I think our portfolio companies use it heavily and should. This accelerates people's software development. In terms of the future, and maybe the piece that people aren't quite yet ready for, but I think we're quite close to the cusp of, I think it's more complete business process mapping and essentially kind of agent insertion into the kind of low human involvement parts of those business processes. I think sales automation is one area where we've seen a bunch of agentic businesses recently, areas of the law, accounting, audit. These are things that humans are doing today that humans could do at a massively accelerated rate with the help of business process mapping, essentially.
I think, first of all, the adoption rate seems to be much faster with the startup scene than large, let's say, incumbents. Because you have a struggle within incumbents of people who are really against it, or they can see that it's taking our jobs and so forth, while startups are still grabbing and challenging the markets. So I can see that adoption going well. If I think, I come from more like a marketplace kind of background where you kind of balance out demand and supply and matching. I think AI is perfect tool for that because it's far better on matching, it's far better of predicting demand and supply. So I'm just waiting for more radical innovation coming in, which is not about how companies are adopting AI. It's more like really rethinking how marketplaces or matching happens, how the liquidity of the different goods or assets will happen, how the trading will happen in the end and so forth. And I'm more waiting for that moment to start to see that rather than this incremental notching on efficiencies or incremental development, which is then typically in large companies or so forth, they look for more incremental improvements rather than any radical ones. And I think startups can really drive that radical part.
Question for you, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Schibsted's a reasonably sized business.
Yes.
How are they starting to use AI? If you can tell us in this room without breaching confidentiality.
So background, we've been using machine learning for the last 10 years, most
right.
like moderating and whatnot. Those are the incremental efficiency gains that you can do. And we are using AI in different parts of the process, but we are afraid of the radical changes because you are protecting your revenues and profitability. Any radical changes might, and we are a public company, that's a challenge as well. I can see that we have limitations, and therefore our role as a venture team is to look something that is pure radical and look for something that can really disrupt us. Because I think that would be most amazing kind of story as well. We've been reinventing from media business to online classifieds, now to transactional and whatnot. So the next wave will happen much faster than mobility apps or on internet happens. So I'm more looking forward what's coming up next couple of years.
Great.
Yeah, I think on the enterprise adoption question, I think there's almost a question of definitions in the sense that, some people call, what is an AI product, right? Some people say, it's kind of like if someone says, yeah, it's a mobile product. You're like, okay, well, I don't know exactly what, that's basically every company. So there's some companies that have a lot of AI, and there are others that have small little features that are powered by AI. And I think the kind of difference in adoption rates is going to be dependent on kind of that question. So obviously we've seen all the developments in LLMs, and there's a whole kind of infrastructure layer that's getting built around that can help with things like hallucinations in the outputs of LLMs, which is still a massive problem. So if you're a law firm or something, and you have an AI that drafts a legal document that is like incorrect or something that ends up costing you millions or billions of dollars down the line, like it's so business critical that of course there's going to be a slower adoption until there are better like guardrails to make sure that the output of the product is perfect. And that's probably why also a lot of the adoption that we've seen in AI is more consumer products that have less kind of like margin for error, a lot more margin for error. So if you're using, Mid-Journey, for example, like this text-to-image model, it doesn't really matter if it's wrong. Same thing with, the companies that made quite a lot of noise that were like AI copywriting tools like Jasper and Copy AI and so on. And again, like you use those types of tools to kind of get like a structure of after which the human would then take over. And again, it doesn't really matter if it's wrong. So I think those types of tools are very quick to get adopted. But yeah, I agree. I think clearly there are going to be a lot of use cases where the infrastructure hasn't quite caught up to where it needs to be in terms for the stuff to get like fully deployed throughout the enterprise.
Yeah, I've actually talked to a lot of law firms recently that have said because of how important AI is, they've either hired a head of a legal tech partner or they have a really comprehensive AI strategy roadmap. But so far the tools that they see on the market, because of the hallucination issues that you said, they aren't able to rely on that for something like legal research yet. Yeah. It's more for automation of emails and those other tasks and use cases that you mentioned. So super, super good discussion. I think given the time, let's do some final wrap-up comments. I would love to leave the audience with some specific things that they can do. So, the last question I want to end with is, what can everyone do in this room tomorrow to make sure that AI is helping their lives?
If I were an entrepreneur, I would spend half an hour or an hour, if you have a full hour, looking at the open source tooling that is already available that you can start building into parts of how you think about running your business, not necessarily even your customer-facing product, but just the operating motion of your business. A lot of what people are building in terms of big agentic enterprise businesses for law, for accounting, for audit, are actually fundamentally at their core open source AI tools that you can repurpose for smaller businesses quite easily. And I think there are big cost savings, aside from the revenue point and aside from the societal improvement point, I think there are cost savings that people can achieve with what is available in the world today.
Great.
I sort of agree in that sense that the way how you build startups today is quite fundamentally different than it was a couple of years ago. You can experiment so much faster. You have vast amount of open source tools that you use. You don't need to have 10 developers anymore. You just need to have a couple of good ones who are using all the tools and letting AI to kind of do the drafting and most of the code. I think you need to gain more speed by utilizing all the tools you can, and then probably spot some sort of painful area for companies. If you want to B2B SaaS model, you need to spot those painful points from different industries and just experiment and find your route and see the traction. But I think the friction to get there and speed to get there is so much, like friction is lower and speed is higher today. You can really accelerate that with a bunch of, let's say, 5 people. And I think the challenge when I always been seeing companies to grow, they hire too many people too early, and then you end up on more like HR dilemma rather than really kind of dense core team. And I think now you can keep the dense core team so much longer and gain the speed. And then when you hit the kind of or validate your kind of repeatable model, then you can start hiring based on that. But now you can really kind of, with the low cost and low capital kind of requirements, go much faster than before. So I think just use whatever you can use in open source and go fast.
So be mindful about how you're hiring and use AI to augment that. And then what can they do tomorrow to do this? Think about the hiring roadmap. That's your advice?
No, I think one part, like a good example is my oldest son. He graduated from London from business school. 1.5 years ago, and now he's a full stack AI developer, working remotely to New York and San Francisco from London. I never thought that somebody coming from business school would become developer, but he is utilizing the open source tools, and you can really see that you can, with the smart people, you can really do lots of stuff that was not kind of imaginable before, in a way. He was not a developer at all. Now he is really like thriving on that because of these tools.
Yeah.
So it's a good example, to me to think differently.
Super good.
Yeah, I think if you think of like from a founder perspective, what would get me excited is like it does feel like you're at there's this window of opportunity now where AI really enables like a completely different business model to what is currently out there that you just don't have often, right? Like I think the last time these kind of like monumental business model opportunity shifts came along was from basically like on-prem to cloud. And when you think of what like a Salesforce did in the CRM market, before Salesforce you had companies like Siebel, for example, where it was like on-prem, you host it, you install it, and then the cloud came along and these guys were able to completely upend that business model and offer like a hosted, you just log in, we do everything for you, you pay per seat. And that's, again, like the same kind of analogy applies to now, where I think we've spoken about like these agentic type of systems where you can basically sell work and not software. And so if you can kind of like think of building a company through that lens, which we're starting to see a lot more of, I'm sure you guys are as well, where it's just entrepreneurs coming and applying that notion to a lot of different problem areas and basically completely reinventing the business model of how this stuff can be done. Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. These things don't come along every couple of years. Like so that's...
Brilliant. Thank you again for joining us on stage for this very, very topical discussion. I'm very, very curious where we'll be in a year's time so we can discuss again and see if the points that we made ended up being right.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.